This is the last part of Unit 4 lecture on political geography. Had we have had class today, your night's charge would have been to describe an African state that fits the following shape categories: prorupted, perforated, and compact. As you are studying for your map quiz on Africa, I want you to take special note of the shapes of those African states. See if you can pick out a compact state, a perforated state, a prorupted state, a elongated state, or a fragmented state. You'll probably also notice that Africa as the continent has a lot of states that are landlocked. So please make sure that you do this. While you don't need to write it down in your night's charges, it is important for your test on Friday. So let's finish up the notes for this unit really quickly. We're going to begin by talking about the geopolitical world order. So much of politics in the United States is discussed at the state or national scale. But in human geography, we are interested in global world politics. Throughout the world's history, there have been temporary periods of stability in how politics are conducted at the global scale. After World War II, after the defeat of the Axis powers, the world had this bipolar power with the United States and the USSR, or the Soviet Union, what we know today to be Russia, were the two world powers. And really, the US and the Soviet Union were in a race with one another to see which one could become the world superpower before the other. Today, we live in this multipolar geopolitical world order where there's no longer just two states that are world powers. We have many major world powers. However, despite the fact that a lot of these world powers are in supranationalistic organizations like NATO or the EU or the United Nations, sometimes states act unilaterally. Unilateralism is when one state, often the United States, but not always, acts alone. And when one state acts alone, when one state decides to do something that other states do not agree with, that creates resentment and hostility. We see this right now happening in Russia. It was Vladimir Putin's idea to hold an election in Crimea to have the people vote whether or not they wanted to be part of Russia or stay part of the Ukraine. Most of the international community, most other states do not agree with that election and are saying that Vladimir Putin acted unilaterally, that only Russia decided to do this. They didn't consult anyone else before holding this election. Acting unilaterally can get states into trouble, especially when those states are part of supranationalistic organizations. So the question that we should be asking ourselves is, will individual states remain the dominant actors in a future geopolitical world order, or will there be some type of movement where current superpowers are no longer superpowers anymore? Before we talk about the current world powers, I want to talk a little bit about what happened during the Cold War. The Cold War was, it started going on after World War II and lasted all the way up until really the early 1990s. And this is a period of time when the United States was extremely fearful that communism would spread around the world. China had become a communist country. The Soviet Union was a communist country, and really we were terrified that communism would spread to other areas of the world, including the Western Hemisphere, including the United States. So the United States adopted this containment theory, which was kind of a strategy in order to prevent the spread of communism abroad. So if you think about when you put something in a container and you seal it off, nothing can get out of that container. That's what we were hoping to do with communism during the Cold War. And really what made the United States create this containment theory was the domino theory. If you've ever played dominoes, if you stacked them up, when you hit the first one, as you can see in the picture, all of them will sequentially fall over. The United States was convinced that as countries became communist countries, that the surrounding countries would also fall to communism. So when China became a communist country, so did Korea, then Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia and Thailand. And we were terrified that that kind of domino effect would spill over into the Western Hemisphere, and it did. When Cuba became a communist country, this is when the United States really starts to worry. So again, the domino theory and the containment theory were part of that bipolar world order where we had two superpowers. Today, though, we live in this multipolar state where you've got several superpowers, including the United States and Russia, but also Brazil, China, India are also key players, and the European Union as a whole is seen to be a superpower, especially an economic superpower. So all of those countries in the EU together are united as a superpower of the 21st century. Now, when we talk about the geopolitical world order, we need to be talking about the economy as well as politics. The world economy is more than the sum of its parts. This is kind of a hard concept to grasp, but we talk about it in psychology. It's called Gestalt, in that the sum is more than its parts. If you look at a painting, this painting in particular, you will see that the painting is composed only of dots. But in order to understand the dots, we look at the painting as a whole, and that's exactly what we should do with the world economy. Emanuel Wallerstein created a theory. Actually, he likes to refer to it as an analysis. Emanuel Wallerstein created an world systems analysis where he says 3 things happen in the world economy. Number 1, the world economy has one market and a global division of labor. The global division of labor is where some countries specialize in certain products and services and other countries specialize in different services and products. So for example, India, we're thinking about call centers. Japan, China, we're thinking about electronics. That is the division of labor, where the United States is more important in other areas as far as economic areas. The second thing the world system analysis says is, although the world has multiple states, almost everything takes place within the context of the world economy. So we all know that the United States economy is going to be affected by economies all over the world. And the world economy has really led to this 3-tier structure where we have European nations, and those settled by European migrants are the ones that are these more developed countries, the ones that are extracting the wealth. And then the countries that have constantly been colonized and imperialized are the countries that are not as stable economically. The most important part of Emanuel Wallerstein's world systems analysis deals with the idea that the world economy is made up of capitalism, commodification, and colonialism. These 3 individual things are not as important as the third part of his theory, which is the 3-tier structure. He says that the world has states that fall in the core and the periphery. If you are a core state, you are going to incorporate higher levels of education. You're going to have people with higher salaries and more technology than states that fall in the periphery. If a state falls in the periphery, they are going to be incorporating low levels of education, low salaries for their people, and less technology than those in the core. Recently, we've created this semi-periphery state where states that fall in this semi-periphery are places that are exploited by the core, but then exploit the periphery. So if you look at the 3-tier structure on a map, it looks something like this, where you've got more developed countries, including the United States and Canada, Western European countries, and Australia falling in the core, whereas the periphery countries are definitely the LDCs. Look at all of the African states that fall in the periphery. You've got the Middle Eastern states, and then also some of South America falling in the periphery. Whereas the yellow countries are the semi-periphery. They're not as strong as the core states, but they also take advantage of the periphery states just like the core states do. And the reason why we break it up into core and periphery is if you look at a map, and I know this is really blurry, but this is in your book. If you look at a world map from a North Polar projection, you can see that more developed countries are going to be falling in the core, and less developed countries are on the periphery. So the core countries are the more developed countries, the countries that have stronger economies, and the periphery countries are the countries that are weaker. All right, moving really quickly into terrorism. This is the last part of chapter 8. Why has terrorism increased? On your quiz yesterday, you had the question, what is terrorism? And terrorism is definitely different from a lot of other violent political acts that have been committed throughout the years. Obviously, to the United States, to Americans, when we think about terrorism, we really think of two things, 9/11 and Al-Qaeda. So let's run through this really quickly. After the United States was attacked on 9/11, the United States decided to invade Iraq. Now, this decision was done unilaterally. The United States, Congress, the president at the time decided that in order to kind of decrease terrorism around the world, the United States needed to invade Iraq because they had weapons of mass destruction that they were going to use in countries around the world, including the United States, as an act of terrorism. However, no weapons of mass destruction were found. Iraq posed no threat to the United States or neighbors, and it was being contained by the UN. The UN put sanctions on Iraq. The current unemployment of Iraqi citizens is over 50%, and a lot of this is thought to have been an effect of the United States invading Iraq. The war in Iraq was definitely hotly contested in the United States. This is an anti-war protest in New York City on 2006. President Obama has withdrawn most of the active combat troops from Iraq, but of course we still have men in Afghanistan. So after 9/11, not only did we invade Iraq, we actually sent troops into Afghanistan first. We knew that the Taliban, which is a terrorist organization, sheltered bin Laden, and the Taliban decided to, the United States removed the Taliban from power after we invaded in 2001. Of course, President Obama, along with the Navy SEAL team, were able to capture and kill bin Laden in 2011, and current plans for our troops in Afghanistan is to remove them by 2015. And then the other kind of big terrorist threat that you'll hear is Iran. The United States and Iran have had issues. There's been hostility between the two countries since 1979. When you take U.S. history, you'll learn about the Iran hostage crisis, which is when this kind of hostility started. And the United States was accused of housing Al-Qaeda. Let me say that again. The United States accused Iran of housing Al-Qaeda, and we currently do know that Iran is developing nuclear weapons. So they are always on our radar for terrorist threats. But also terrorist threats can happen within the United States. We know that we've had American citizens be terrorists, not only to our country, but to other countries. But unfortunately for the world, terrorism has increased, not significantly, but it's definitely more on our radar now than it has been in our nation's history. So that is going to do it for notes for Unit 4. If you have questions, let me know. Your test is on Friday. Make sure that you're working on your projects with your groups. Thanks, guys.